There's something hauntingly beautiful about standing at the foot of an ancient pyramid or tracing your fingers along the weathered stones of a temple built thousands of years ago. These structures whisper secrets of the past, but not just the stories of pharaohs or emperors. Hidden in the shadows of history are the true architects of these marvels, the ordinary men and women who shaped the world with their hands, yet whose names were never carved into stone. Who were they? Not slaves, as some legends claim, and certainly not royalty, but people like you and me, with families, dreams, and lives far richer than history books have led us to believe. Today, we're stepping into their world, uncovering the secret daily lives of ancient builders who are neither slaves nor royalty, and piecing together the untold chapters of their existence. Think about the last time you built something, maybe a shelf, a garden bed, or even a sandcastle. Now imagine doing it without modern tools, without blueprints, without the comfort of knowing how your work would be remembered. That's the reality these builders faced every day, yet they poured their skill, their faith, and even their laughter into stones that would outlive empires. What did they eat after a long day of lifting blocks under the scorching sun? How did they organize their communities, resolve disputes, or celebrate milestones? These aren't just details, they're the heartbeat of history, the human stories behind the monuments that leave us breathless even now. This isn't just a journey into the past, it's a chance to meet the people who made the impossible possible. We'll explore the tools they wielded, the homes they returned to at night, and the beliefs that kept them going when the work seemed endless. Along the way, you'll discover how their lives were woven into the very fabric of the structures we admire today. Proof that greatness isn't just the domain of kings, but of everyday people with extraordinary determination. So take a step closer to those ancient walls. Listen carefully, because if you do, you might just hear the echoes of their voices calling across the centuries to finally tell their story. The image of slaves toiling under the lash to build the pyramids is one of history's most stubborn myths, but it's time to set the record straight. These builders weren't forced laborers, they were skilled professionals, often part of tight-knit communities that took immense pride in their craft. Picture a stonemason shaping a block with precision, knowing his work would stand for millennia, or a carpenter fitting beams into place with the same care a modern artisan might give to fine furniture. These weren't anonymous figures lost to time. They were people with names, families, and reputations to uphold. Archaeology paints a vivid picture of their lives. Near the Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, researchers uncovered an entire village where workers lived not cramped, filthy barracks, but well-built homes with courtyards, bakeries, and even medical facilities. Skeletal remains show signs of healed injuries, proof they received care rather than being discarded like broken tools. And here's something even more telling. Tombs found nearby belong to the builders themselves, some adorned with titles like Overseer of Construction or Friend of the King. These weren't the burials of slaves, they were honors bestowed on respected members of society. What about pay? Records from ancient Egypt reveal workers were compensated with bread, beer, and sometimes even land, essentially, a fair wage for skilled labor. In Mesopotamia, clay tablets detail contracts for builders, specifying deadlines, materials, and penalties for shoddy workmanship. Far from being driven by whips, these projects ran on something far more powerful: professional pride. Imagine a team of stonemasons arguing over the perfect angle for a joint, not out of fear, but because they wanted their section of the temple to be the best. That's the real story behind these monuments, not oppression, but collaboration, craftsmanship, and a shared sense of purpose. So why does the myth of slave labor persist? Part of it comes from ancient propaganda. Rulers liked to boast that their monuments were built by captives or conquered peoples to emphasize their power. Later, Hollywood dramatized these exaggerations, turning complex histories into simple tales of tyranny. But the truth is far more interesting. These builders were the backbone of their societies, their labor valued and their skills passed down through generations. When we look at the pyramids or the Parthenon today, we're not just seeing the vanity of kings, we're witnessing the quiet, enduring legacy of ordinary people who built the extraordinary. To understand the daily lives of these ancient builders, we have to look beyond the stones they laid and into the societies they shaped. These weren't nameless laborers lost in the crowd. They were specialists, often holding a respected place in their communities. In Egypt, for instance, the men who carved hieroglyphs or aligned pyramid blocks weren't just workers. They were part of a guild-like system where skill determined status. The best among them could rise to become overseers, managing teams and even advising architects. Their expertise was so valued that some were buried with the very tools they used, a sign of honor rarely given to the lower classes. Move to Mesopotamia, and the picture gets even more fascinating. Clay tablets from cities like Ur and Babylon reveal construction contracts where master builders negotiated terms, hired apprentices, and even guaranteed their work. If a wall collapsed due to poor craftsmanship, the builder faced fines, but if it stood the test of time, his reputation soared. This wasn't just a job. It was a career, one that could elevate a family's standing for generations. Imagine a young apprentice learning to mix mortar under his father's watchful eye. Knowing mastery of this craft could mean a comfortable home, regular meals, and even a voice in local decisions. Then there's Mesoamerica, where the builders of Teotihuacan or Tikal operated under a different but equally intriguing system. Here, construction was often tied to religious duty, with teams organized by neighborhood or lineage. Workers might rotate between farming and building during sacred seasons, feasting together after hauling stones for a temple's foundation. These weren't solitary tasks but communal efforts, woven into the rhythm of daily life. Artifacts found at these sites painted murals of construction scenes or small figurines of laborers holding tools, suggest their work was celebrated, not hidden. What tied these cultures together was the recognition that building was more than manual labor. It was a blend of artistry, engineering, and tradition. A skilled stonemason in Thebes might trade tips with a colleague over beer, while a Mayan carpenter could earn extra rations for perfecting a difficult joint. These privileges weren't random, they were earned through years of practice, often passed down in families like precious heirlooms. And when a project was completed, the celebrations weren't just for the rulers, they were for the builders too. Feasts, music, and even days of rest marked their achievements, proving that honor wasn't reserved for the elite alone. So the next time you see an ancient wall or statue, remember, the hands that shaped it didn't just belong to faceless workers. They belonged to fathers teaching sons, to innovators refining techniques, to men and women who took pride in leaving their mark on the world. Their social standing might not have matched the kings they built for, but in the eyes of their communities, they were indispensable, and that's a legacy worth uncovering. Imagine trying to carve a block of granite with nothing but a piece of copper. That's exactly what ancient builders did, and the results still defy logic today. Their tools might seem primitive by modern standards, but their understanding of physics, materials, and teamwork turned simple implements into instruments of precision. Take the copper chisel, a staple in Egyptian workshops. Though softer than stone, when paired with abrasive sand and relentless patience, it could shape the hardest granite over time. The trick, constant resharpening and knowing exactly where to strike. These craftsmen weren't just swinging tools blindly. They were reading the stone like a map, finding its natural fractures and working with them rather than against them. Moving those massive blocks was another puzzle entirely. Without wheels or pulleys, builders relied on wooden sleds, but here's the genius part. They poured water in front of them. Experiments have shown that dampening sand reduced friction by up to 50%, turning a back-breaking drag into a manageable slide. Teams of workers could then haul stones weighing tons across distances that seem impossible today. Ramps, often built from mud brick or compacted earth, zigzagged up construction sites, acting as ancient conveyor belts. Archaeologists even found traces of these ramps at sites like Karnak, their slopes carefully calculated to balance effort and stability. Precision was everything. A misplaced block could destabilize an entire pyramid, so builders used simple but ingenious leveling tools. The Merkit, an Egyptian device resembling a plumb bob, helped align structures with the stars, ensuring temples faced true north. Meanwhile, string lines and wooden squares kept corners perfectly angled. In Mesoamerica, builders employed cord and stick methods to check alignments over long distances, proving that accuracy didn't require high-tech gadgets, just keen observation and shared knowledge passed down through generations. And let's not forget the power of teamwork. Rope made from flax or hemp bound stones for lifting, while log rollers allowed crews to pivot blocks into place. In China, builders used interlocking wooden brackets to distribute weight in pagodas, a technique so effective it's still studied by engineers today. Every solution was born from trial, error, and collective problem-solving, proof that innovation thrives under constraints. The true marvel isn't just the tools themselves, but how they reveal the minds behind them. These builders didn't see limits, they saw challenges to outthink. When we look at the Great Pyramid's flawless joints or the Inca's mortarless walls, we're not just seeing stones stacked high. We're witnessing the quiet triumph of human ingenuity, where every chip of the chisel and tug of the rope carried the weight of a shared dream, to build something that would outlast them all. The first light of dawn didn't just wake these builders, it called them to purpose. As the sun crept over the horizon, crews assembled with tools in hand, their day already mapped out by the rhythm of the project. Quarrymen, their arms dusted with stone fragments, would be the first to swing into action, using copper chisels and wooden mallets to free blocks from the earth. Nearby, haulers coiled ropes, ready to drag those stones across makeshift sledges, their chants sinking with each tug. Overseers moved between teams, not with whips, but with measuring rods and clay tablets, ticking off progress. This wasn't chaos, it was a symphony of coordinated labor where every role mattered. By mid-morning, the heat would drive workers to pause, but not idle. Shaded areas buzzed with activity as crews gathered for a meal, not scraps but hearty provisions. At Deir el Medina, payroll records list rations of bread so thick it could last days, beer brewed thick enough to spoon a nutritious staple, not just a drink, and dried fish or lentils for protein. These weren't just meals, they were fuel carefully calculated to sustain strength. Archaeologists even found evidence of on-site kitchens, where bakers shaped loaves in clay ovens, ensuring no one worked hungry. Afternoon brought a shift in tempo. Carvers took center stage, their chisels biting into stone with practiced strokes. Apprentice boys mixed plaster or fetched water, learning the trade through observation and elbow grease. Meanwhile, scribes etched notes onto ostraka pottery shards, reused as notepads detailing supplies needed or delays caused by sandstorms. Far from being faceless drones, these workers had voices. Some shards even contain complaints about late pay or jokes about foremen, proving humor crossed millennia. As the sun dipped, tools were cleaned and stored, but the day wasn't done. Evenings blurred work and community. Men might gather to mend a frayed rope or sharpen blades, while others traded stories of near misses or legendary projects from years past. In Egypt, fragments of poetry and board games like Senet suggest leisure was cherished. In Mesoamerica, builders might join ceremonial dances, their labor honored as both duty and devotion. This wasn't just a job, it was a life. The rhythm of their days mirrored the season's intense labor during cool months, slower paces when heat or floods struck. They celebrated births and mourned losses together, leaving offerings in tiny household shrines. When we picture these builders, we shouldn't see exhausted figures bent under whips, but people who laughed over beer, argued over the best way to lift a lintel, and fell asleep knowing their hands had moved mountains. Their legacy isn't just in the stones they placed, but in the ordinary, extraordinary lives they lived between sunrise and sunset. The builders who raised the pyramids and temples of the ancient world didn't just work on empty stomachs. They were fueled by meals that would put many modern lunches to shame. Excavations at worker settlements reveal something surprising. These weren't starving laborers scraping by on scraps, but well-fed teams with diets carefully designed for endurance. In Egypt, payroll records from Deir el-Medina detail monthly rations that included 60 pounds of grain per worker, enough to bake nearly 200 loaves of dense, nutritious bread. But it wasn't just carbs keeping them going. Archaeologists found remains of fish from the Nile, cuts of beef and goat, even lentils and onions tucked into the corners of their homes. These weren't occasional treats. They were regular provisions, distributed with the same precision as their construction assignments. What's truly remarkable is how these meals were prepared. At Giza, the discovery of massive bakeries near worker housing shows bread production on an industrial scale. Some ovens could fire hundreds of loaves at once, their domed chambers trapping heat to create a thick crust that preserved freshness. And let's talk about beer, not the watery drink we know today, but a thick, porridge-like brew packed with calories and vitamins. Workers received daily portions, often sipping it through straws to avoid grain husks. Far from being a luxury, this fermented fuel was as essential as their chisels, offering energy and hydration under the desert sun. Travel to the Andes, and the story shifts but stays just as nourishing. Incan builders working on Machu Picchu's terraces relied on chuño, freeze-dried potatoes that could last for years, and quinoa stews enriched with llama meat. The state even maintained storehouses along construction routes, stocked with charqui jerky and maize to keep crews moving. What ties these cultures together is intentionality. Whether it's the fish bones found in Egyptian worker villages or the ceramic cooking pots unearthed at Teotihuacan, the message is clear: you don't move multi-ton stones without proper fuel. But food wasn't just physical sustenance, it wove these communities together. Imagine workers sharing a meal after hauling a block into place, passing a jar of beer as they traded stories. Baking pits found in Mayan labor camps suggest feasts to mark milestones, where entire teams celebrated progress with spiced meats and cocoa. These moments remind us that construction sites weren't just places of sweat and strain, but of camaraderie seasoned with the smell of fresh bread and the sound of laughter. When we picture these builders now, we should see them not just with tools in hand, but with bowls in their laps, gathering strength from meals that were as much a part of their legacy as the stones they lifted. The neighborhoods where ancient builders lived weren't just clusters of huts slapped together near work sites. They were carefully planned communities, designed to sustain the people who sustained empires. At Giza, the remains of a sprawling settlement just south of the Great Pyramid tell a story that shatters old stereotypes. Rows of mud brick houses, some with multiple rooms and courtyards, line streets that still bear the grooves of daily foot traffic. These weren't cramped barracks but proper homes, some even featuring painted walls and raised sleeping platforms. Archaeologists found evidence of bakeries where the scent of fresh bread would have greeted workers at dawn, and infirmaries stocked with medical supplies like honey for wounds and willow bark for pain, proof that these builders' well-being mattered. Half a world away, Teotihuacan's builders lived in apartment compounds that doubled as artistic showcases. Murals there depict scenes of their trades, men hauling ropes, mixing plaster, even celebrating with feasts. The walls themselves were painted in vibrant reds and greens, a far cry from the drab quarters we might imagine. Some apartments had drainage systems and shared kitchens, suggesting a communal approach to daily life. But perhaps most telling are the personal touches: tiny figurines of deities placed in doorways or fragments of pottery inscribed with names. These weren't anonymous laborers, they were neighbors who borrowed tools, shared meals, and took pride in their shared craft. What's striking is how these villages mirrored the ingenuity of the monuments they served. In the Indus Valley, builders' quarters at Mohenjo-Daro included indoor plumbing, with clay pipes channeling wastewater away from living spaces. At Petra, Nabatean stoneworkers carved homes directly into cliffs, their doorways aligning with natural fissures to stay cool in the desert heat. Every detail, from the orientation of streets to the thickness of walls, reflected an understanding of comfort and efficiency. These communities also had hierarchies woven into their layouts. Near the Valley of the Kings, senior craftsmen lived in larger homes closer to the worksite, while apprentices' quarters sat slightly farther out, a physical reminder of career progression. In Rome, inscriptions from Austria's builder guilds list addresses, showing how specialists like mosaicists or marble carvers clustered together, likely trading tricks of the trade over evening wine. But the real heart of these neighborhoods wasn't just their design, it was how they fostered identity. A potter in ancient China might stamp his work with a clan symbol. A Mayan plasterer could leave handprints in wet stucco as a quiet signature. These weren't transient work camps, but places where generations grew up, where skills were passed down like heirlooms. When we walk through their ruins today, we're not just seeing where they slept. We're stepping into the spaces where they laughed, argued, and dreamed, proof that even the grandest monuments were built by human hands, anchored in ordinary lives. Broken bones were an occupational hazard when your job involved lifting stones heavier than elephants, but ancient builders didn't just suffer in silence. The cracks in their skeletons tell a story of resilience and surprisingly sophisticated healthcare. Take the case of a worker buried near the Great Pyramid. His forearm fracture healed so cleanly that modern doctors can tell it was set with precision. Nearby, another skeleton shows signs of successful trepanation, a daring procedure where healers drilled into the skull to relieve pressure, proving these builders had access to more than just bandages and prayers. Medical papyri from Egypt read like ancient emergency manuals. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, a 3,000-year-old text, details treatments for construction injuries with clinical precision. Dislocated shoulders were popped back into place using weighted traction. Deep wounds were stitched with linen thread and coated in honey, a natural antibiotic. Even spinal injuries had protocols, with healers advising when to splint and when to let nature take its course. This wasn't guesswork, it was systematized knowledge passed down through generations of practitioners who understood the toll of monumental labor. But the real revelation lies in the infrastructure. At Deir el-Medina, the village housing tomb builders in Luxor, archaeologists uncovered a structure dubbed the world's first workers' clinic. Inside, they found herb-stained grinding stones, bundles of dried willow bark, a natural painkiller, and even specialized beds for recovery. Wall inscriptions list rotating physician shifts with titles like Healer of the Crew, suggesting medical care was as routine as tool maintenance. Cross the globe to the Andes, and Inca builders had their own innovations. Excavations at Machu Picchu reveal skeletons with healed compound fractures injuries that would have been fatal without intervention. Researchers found evidence of splints made from bundled reeds and padded with llama wool, while traces of coca leaves near work sites hint at their use as both stimulant and anesthetic during grueling tasks. What's truly striking is how these systems reflected societal values. In Mesopotamia, clay tablets from Ur specify that injured builders received extra rations during recovery, a form of workers' compensation millennia before the term existed. Roman construction guilds pooled funds to pay for members' medical care, while Chinese texts describe imperial decrees mandating rest periods for laborers with repetitive strain injuries. These weren't just medical advancements, they were investments. Keeping a skilled builder alive and working was far more economical than training replacements. When we see the perfectly aligned bones in a 4,000-year-old skeleton, we're not just looking at healed fractures, we're seeing the invisible contracts between laborers and societies that understood something profound. Great monuments aren't built on broken backs, but on bodies and minds cared for with intention. When the first stones of an ancient temple were laid, it wasn't just a construction project, it was a prayer made solid. Every measurement, every angle, every carving whispered devotion. In Egypt, the rising sun striking the inner sanctum of Karnak wasn't an accident. It was celestial choreography, the temple's axis aligning with the winter solstice to bathe the god Ammon's statue in golden light. Over in Mesopotamia, ziggurats rose like stairways to heaven, their 7 tiers mirroring the 7 known planets. Even the mortar between bricks held meaning mixed with sacred oils or crushed gemstones, turning walls into literal vessels of the divine. These builders didn't just haul stones, they performed rituals as precise as their masonry. Before a single block was cut, Egyptian crews celebrated the stretching of the cord ceremony, where priests used the stars to mark the temple's foundation lines, tying earthly plans to cosmic order. In the Andes, Incan architects poured chicha sacred corn beer into trenches as offerings to Pachamama, Mother Earth, before setting stones. And at Angkor Wat, inscriptions describe workers fasting and meditating to purify themselves before carving delicate Apsara dancers into temple walls. This wasn't superstition, it was a recognition that building something eternal required more than muscle, it demanded harmony with forces beyond human scale. Festivals punctuated the grind of construction, weaving spirituality into the work's rhythm. During the Babylonian New Year, builders downed tools for 12 days of processions where statues of gods were paraded through half-finished gates, blessing the labor. Mayan stellar records show crews at Tikal pausing to dance in jaguar masks, reenacting myths where gods built the world. Even the pharaoh's new motivation wasn't just about wages. Pay records from Deir el-Medina note extra beer rations during the Feast of the Valley, when workers decorated tombs with flowers before feasting with their ancestors' spirits. The tools themselves became sacred objects. A stonemason's chisel might be anointed with myrrh, a carpenter's adze inscribed with protective runes. In China, builders buried foundation tablets inscribed with prayers to Tudi Gong, the earth god, beneath gateways. And when injuries struck, as they inevitably did, healers blended medicine with incantations, treating the body and soul as one. What's remarkable is how these traditions crossed cultures. Whether it's the identical cornerstone rituals found in both Mycenaean Greece and Olmec, Mexico, or the shared practice of placing relics in walls from Buddhist stupas to Christian cathedrals, builders universally saw their work as a bridge between realms. The next time you marvel at an ancient column, look closer. That slight curve, it's not an error. It's a deliberate interruptions designed to make the stone appear to breathe, a visual hymn to the idea that even inanimate materials held divine sparks. These builders didn't just construct monuments, they wove the sacred into every joint and seam, leaving behind not just buildings but stone-bound acts of faith. History has a habit of erasing half its workforce when telling the story of ancient construction. While scribes carved the names of male builders into stone, the hands that mixed their mortar, spun their ropes, and painted their temples often belonged to women, their contributions fading like pigments under the sun. But if we look closer, the evidence is everywhere. At Çatalhöyük, one of the world's earliest cities, archaeologists found walls adorned with intricate plaster reliefs of leopards and goddesses, their surfaces still bearing the fingerprints of the artisans who shaped them. Analysis revealed something remarkable. Those fingerprints were overwhelmingly female, their smaller, distinct ridges pressed into the clay like silent signatures. These women weren't just occasional helpers, they were integral to every phase of building. In Egypt, tomb paintings show teams of women grinding malachite and azurite into vibrant paints for temple walls, their skirts stained blue and green from hours of labor. At Giza, fragments of woven fiber ropes, strong enough to hold 2-ton blocks, were likely made by women trained in complex knotting techniques passed down through generations. Even the logistics of feeding thousands of workers depended on their expertise. Receipts from Deir el-Medina list women supervising grain stores and brewing beer in quantities that would rival modern microbreweries, their work ensuring crews stayed fueled. The myth that ancient construction was solely men's work crumbles under scrutiny. In Mesopotamia, cuneiform tablets record women as owners of brickmaking workshops, their seals stamped onto contracts for city walls. At Teotihuacan, skeletal analysis of builders' graves revealed something unexpected. Nearly a third were women, their arm bones showing the same muscular development as male laborers from years of lifting and carving. Some were buried with stone working tools, their status as skilled craftswomen honored in death. Why does this matter? Because it reshapes how we see these monuments. When the Parthenon's marble gleamed under Athenian sunlight, it was women who polished its surfaces to a mirror finish. When the Colosseum's arches rose, women likely managed the teams mixing its volcanic concrete. Their absence from record says more about ancient biases than reality. Next time you see an ancient fresco, look past the figures painted on it. Consider the hands who prepared the pigments, the ones who stretched the canvas, the voices who likely sang while they worked. The stones remember what history forgot. The idea of a paycheck didn't exist in the ancient world, at least not as we know it today. But that doesn't mean these builders worked for free. Their compensation packages might surprise you. In Babylon, cuneiform tablets from the reign of Hammurabi reveal meticulous records of payments to construction crews. A skilled bricklayer could earn 2 shekels of silver per month, enough to buy 300 loaves of bread. But more often than not, wages came in barley, the ancient world's universal currency. Workers received measured rations based on rank, with foremen taking home nearly double what laborers earned. These weren't handouts, they were calculated exchanges, with contracts specifying penalties for late payments or shoddy work. Egypt's system was just as sophisticated. At Deir el-Medina, the village housing tomb builders, records show workers received monthly salaries of grain, fish, vegetables, and even luxury items like sesame oil or honey. The best artisans could earn bonuses: extra linen for a perfectly carved sarcophagus, or a goat for meeting deadlines ahead of schedule. Some were granted small plots of farmland, turning temporary work into generational wealth. One papyrus even details a dispute where a painter demanded, and won back pay for overtime spent gilding a noble's burial chamber. Far from being exploited, these workers had bargaining power. But compensation wasn't just about survival, it was about status. In Mesopotamia, master builders who engineered ziggurats received lapis lazuli amulets or ceremonial daggers, symbols of honor that elevated their social standing. Inca stonemasons working on royal projects were rewarded with coca leaves, a substance reserved for elites, and their families exempted from tribute taxes. Even in death, perks continued. Egyptian artisans buried near the pyramids they built were often interred with tools of their trade, a sign that their skills followed them into the afterlife. What's fascinating is how these systems adapted to local economies. In China's Qin dynasty, builders of the Great Wall were paid in rice wine and hemp cloth, while Roman laborers on the Colosseum received tokens redeemable at nearby markets. The common thread, fairness. Skeletal remains from worker villages show consistent health, with none of the malnutrition marks seen in slave populations. These builders weren't just compensated, they were valued. When we tally their paychecks today, we're not counting coins. We're measuring respect woven into every loaf of bread, every square of linen, every drop of oil that fueled their extraordinary achievements. The secrets of ancient builders weren't whispered in dusty libraries or locked away in royal vaults. They were passed hand to hand, chisel to chisel, in the quiet persistence of daily practice. Picture a young boy in Babylon crouched over a clay tablet, his fingers tracing the geometry problems his teacher just inscribed. If a ramp rises 2 cubits for every 10 cubits of length, how many bricks are needed to pave it? These weren't abstract exercises, they were the blueprints of his future. Surviving tablets from Nippur and reveal entire curricular lessons in calculating brick volumes, plotting right angles with knotted ropes, even estimating labor costs for city walls. Mastery began with counting grain to mix mortar and ended with orchestrating the rise of ziggurats that scraped the sky. This education wasn't solitary. In Egypt, apprenticeship was a family affair. A stonemason's son might start at 6 or 7, first fetching tools, then learning to tap copper chisels at just the right angle to split limestone along its natural veins. By 12, he'd graduate to carving hieroglyphs under his father's watchful eye, each stroke a test of patience. Tomb scenes show these moments frozen in time, an older craftsman adjusting a youth's grip on a mallet, their shadows merging against half-finished pillars. Mistakes were expected, even valued. A scribbled training text from Deir el-Medina admonishes students, "You'll become skilled only after your fingers bleed." But formal schools existed too. In Mesopotamia, builder priests ran academies called adubas, where students memorized material lists and copied architectural plans onto reusable clay tablets. The best graduates earned titles like Lu Sag Ga, the one who knows numbers, and were entrusted with projects like canal systems that demanded precision over miles. Guilds in classical Greece took a different approach, requiring apprentices to produce a masterpiece, literally, a work proving mastery before joining their ranks. A surviving contract from Ephesus specifies that a young marble carver must render the folds of a goddess's robe as fluid as seawater to earn his full wages. The true genius of these systems lay in their adaptability. Inca stonemasons taught without written language, using scale models of temples carved from volcanic rock to demonstrate techniques. Mayan builders trained novices by having them plaster miniature versions of pyramids before touching sacred structures, and everywhere storytelling preserved unwritten wisdom. An elder might recount how his grandfather survived a collapsing scaffold by bracing against a specific joint, turning near disaster into a lesson on load distribution. These traditions didn't just build monuments, they built legacies. When a Roman architect signed his name on a bridge, he wasn't just boasting. He was whispering across centuries, "I stood on the shoulders of those who taught me." Now it's your turn. The chipped practice tablets, the blistered hands, the models smashed and remade, they were all part of a covenant between generations, ensuring that knowledge outlasted empires. Today, when engineers study the earthquake-resistant joints of Machu Picchu or the acoustics of Greek theaters, they're not just analyzing stone, they're decoding the voices of teachers who refused to let their craft die. When the sun dipped below the quarries and tools were set aside, ancient builders didn't just collapse into exhaustion, they came alive. In the shadow of the very monuments they raised, laughter echoed through worker villages as dice rattled across game boards. Take Senet, Egypt's favorite pastime, found scratched into floorstones at Deir el-Medina. More than just a game, it was a spiritual journey, players racing their pieces through the underworld, betting loaves of bread on lucky rolls. Boards were often personalized, some carved with inside jokes or the names of rivals, proving even 5,000 years ago, competition sparked camaraderie. But games were just the beginning. In Mesoamerica, builders traded chisels for rubber balls, competing in ritual matches that mirrored cosmic battles. The great ball court at Capon wasn't just for elites. Worn sandals and patched knee pads found nearby suggest workers played their own versions after hours. And these weren't casual kicks. The Maya believed the outcome could influence crop yields, turning every match into a blend of sport and solemn duty. Victorious teams were celebrated with feasts where chocolate foam, spiced with chili and vanilla, flowed as freely as the music from clay flutes. Music threaded through their downtime everywhere. Egyptian tomb paintings show harpists and percussionists entertaining crews, their songs likely mixing bodywork chants with hymns to Hathor, goddess of joy. Archaeologists at Giza found bone clappers and fragments of lyres in worker quarters, some repaired with linen twine, proof these instruments were treasured, not tossed aside. In the Andes, builders tapped out rhythms on drums made of puma skins, the beats guiding dances that told stories of mountain spirits and heroic labor. Then there were the festivals. Pay records from Babylon mention beer days, when construction halted and entire sites transformed into banquet halls. At these gatherings, master builders might recite epic tales of past projects, the time a ramp collapsed but no one was hurt, or the year the king doubled their rations after a flawless temple dedication. Even in death, they celebrated. Celtic workers in Britain buried their comrades with gaming pieces and drinking horns, ensuring leisure followed them into the afterlife. What's striking is how these activities mirrored their work. The precision of Senet strategies echoed their meticulous masonry. Ball games required the same teamwork as hauling stones. Music's mathematical rhythms paralleled the counting of bricks. For these builders, play wasn't an escape from labor. It was its natural extension, a way to hone skills and strengthen bonds under the guise of revelry. When we unearth their game pieces or trace their dance-worn floors, we're not just finding artifacts, we're hearing echoes of their joy, proof that the hands shaping history knew how to live as fiercely as they built. The linen loincloth wrapped around an Egyptian builder's waist wasn't just fabric, it was a resume. The way he tied the knot, the quality of the weave, even the faint blue stain from lapis lazuli pigments told his crewmates everything they needed to know. This was a man who'd spent years mastering his craft, his clothing whispering status without a single word. Across ancient sites, from the deserts of Giza to the jungles of Tikal, builders' attire walked the line between pure practicality and silent storytelling. In Egypt's scorching heat, simplicity ruled. Tomb paintings at Deir el-Medina show crews in knee-length linen loincloths, the material woven so finely it could pass through a ring, a testament to both comfort and skill. But look closer and distinctions emerge. Overseers often wore pleated kilts with diagonal stripes, their belts fastened with copper buckles shaped like lotus flowers. Apprentices went bare-chested, their shoulders bronzed by the sun, while master carvers draped thin shawls to shield their skin from stone dust. Even sandals spoke volumes. Excavations at the Valley of the Kings revealed leather ones with upturned toes for senior architects, while laborers made do with papyrus soles tied with palm fiber, footwear designed to last just long enough for a project's duration. Mesopotamia told a different sartorial tale. Cylinder seals depict builders in tufted wool skirts, the tiered layers growing more elaborate with rank. A foreman might add a fringed cloak pinned with a lapis lazuli brooch, his beard oiled and curled in the signature style of urban professionals. Contrast this with the Inca stonemasons high in the Andes, wrapped in unku tunics woven with geometric patterns unique to their home villages. These weren't just clothes, they were walking maps of identity, declaring where a builder came from and what guilds he belonged to before he lifted a single tool. Then there were the accessories that blurred the line between tool and ornament. A Mayan plasterer's belt might hold jade amulets alongside bone trowels, each charm believed to grant precision to his hands. Roman concrete workers wore iron rings that doubled as measurement gauges, their fingers permanently marked by the weight of their trade. Even something as mundane as a leather apron became a canvas. Celtic metalworkers stamped theirs with swirling designs that mimicked the ironwork they produced, turning protective gear into a portfolio. What's remarkable is how these choices survived the grind of daily labor. At Tel El Dabba in Egypt, archaeologists found a stash of folded linen buried beneath a worksite floor, its edges still crisp with pleats. This wasn't discarded rag, it was a time capsule carefully stored by someone who took pride in presenting himself well, even covered in quarry dust. Similarly, a frozen Andean mummy dubbed the Builder of Lulaloco wore a feathered head band beneath his work cap, a splash of ceremony persisting at 19,000 feet above sea level. Fashion also became armor against the elements. Scandinavian timber crews layered reindeer hides with the fur turned inward during winter builds, while Mesopotamian brickmakers soaked their wool cloaks in water to cool evaporatively under the brutal sun. Every stitch was a negotiation between durability and dignity, between surviving the job and honoring the hands that did it. When we brush pigment off a fresco or untangle threads from a burial site, we're not just studying ancient textiles. We're decoding the uniform of human ingenuity, one weathered sandal, one frayed belt, one carefully folded kilt at a time. Every chisel stroke and hauled block didn't just shape stone, it sent ripples through entire economies. The quarries where builders extracted limestone or basalt weren't just pits in the ground, they were bustling hubs of industry. Blacksmiths hammered copper tools by the thousands, their forges fueled by charcoal traded from distant forests. Donkey caravans arrived daily, laden with ropes spun from Nile Delta flax or honey from Upper Egypt to sweeten workers' bread. And when those same builders paused to wipe their brows, the clay cups they drank from had likely traveled even farther, wheel thrown by potters in Canaan and glazed with cobalt mined beyond the Sinai. This wasn't just construction, it was a web of interdependence stretching across kingdoms. Temples and monuments acted as economic engines long after their completion. Take Mesopotamia's ziggurats. These towering shrines drew pilgrims by the thousands, each visitor needing food, lodging, and votive offerings. Local farmers prospered selling barley to feed the crowds, while artisans hawked miniature clay replicas of the temple itself. Even the upkeep of these sacred sites created job scribes to record donations, cleaners to sweep sanctums, and of course, builders to repair weather-worn bricks. At Karnak, records show priests employed full-time crews just to repaint fading hieroglyphs, their wages paid from temple treasuries stocked with gifts from devout pharaohs. But the most fascinating trade might have been in knowledge itself. A Hittite architect working on a royal gate in Anatolia could barter his expertise for rare tin from Afghanistan, essential for bronze tools. Cypriot copper miners traded ingots for Egyptian masons' secret mortar recipes, while Greek stonemasons exchanged techniques for quarrying marble with Phoenician shipbuilders desperate for ballast stones. These weren't just transactions, they were cultural handshakes, with building sites serving as ancient Silicon Valleys where innovation spread as fast as goods. The scale of these networks becomes clear when you follow the money, or rather, the barley, cloth, and silver that stood in for currency. Babylonian tablets list project budgets down to the shekel, showing how much went to reed cutters for scaffolding versus jewelers for adorning temple doors. In Mohenjo-Daro, standardized weights found at construction sites suggest a system so precise, a foreman could calculate how many bricks a load of cotton would buy. And when droughts hit or wars disrupted trade, you can trace the crises in the archaeological record, thin mortar layers where bitumen from Mesopotamia grew scarce, or sudden shifts to local stone when foreign quarries became inaccessible. Yet for all its complexity, this system hinged on trust. A Minoan fresco painter might wait months for his Aegean blue pigment to arrive by ship, just as an Inca engineer relied on runners to bring gold dust from the Amazon for gilding Sun temple walls. What kept these chains intact wasn't just royal decrees, but the unspoken pact between every link, from the miner swinging his pick to the baker feeding the crew. When we admire ancient columns today, we're not just seeing stone. We're glimpsing the ghost of a marketplace where sweat and skill were the truest currencies of all. The Great Pyramid casts its shadow peacefully now, but 4,000 years ago, the desert air near Deir el-Medina crackled with tension. The workers who carved tombs for pharaohs downed their chisels, crossed their arms, and did something revolutionary. They went on strike. Not over wages or hours, but for something far more basic: food. Papyrus records from year 29 of Ramses III's reign tell the story in blunt detail. The grain silos were empty, the beer vats dry. For 20 days, rations failed to arrive, and the builders, skilled artisans who could recite temple dimensions from memory, marched past half-finished tombs straight to the local mayor's house. Their words, preserved on crumbling scrolls, still echo: "We are hungry, our throats parched. No more work until we eat." This wasn't a spontaneous outburst, it was a calculated protest. The strikers knew their value. Without them, the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife would stall, a risk no ruler could afford. So they staged their walkout at a critical moment, just as the vizier arrived to inspect progress. The message was clear: respect our labor or the sacred deadlines won't be met, and it worked. Officials scrambled to distribute grain from emergency stores, adding extra oil and fish as appeasement. But the builders didn't stop there. They demanded written guarantees against future delays, setting a precedent that would ripple through generations. A later papyrus from the same site lists a worker's contract with a clause so modern it's startling: "If rations are late again, we cease work without penalty." Egypt wasn't alone. Half a world away, the builders of Babylon's Ishtar Gate staged their own resistance. A clay tablet from Nebuchadnezzar's reign records a work stoppage when straw, essential for reinforcing bricks, was diverted to a rival project. The laborers didn't riot, they negotiated. One particularly eloquent foreman argued that without proper materials, the gate's famed blue glazes would crack, tarnishing the king's legacy. The result, a royal decree prioritizing their supplies, and a subtle shift in power dynamics. What makes these protests extraordinary isn't just their boldness, but their organization. At Deir el-Medina, strikers appointed spokesmen to present grievances, avoiding the chaos that might invite repression. In Rome, builder guilds threatened collective slowdowns on aqueduct projects unless wages kept pace with inflation. Even in cultures with rigid hierarchies like the Indus Valley, archaeologists find hints of resistance: deliberately misshapen bricks stacked in hidden layers, a quiet rebellion against rushed quotas. These weren't desperate pleas, they were assertions of dignity. When Inca stonemasons carving Sacsayhuaman's walls faced unsafe conditions, they didn't flee, they redirected their labor. Chronicles describe crews accidentally perfecting only the stones visible to inspectors, leaving hidden ones rough. The lesson: mistreat builders and corners get cut, even in monuments meant to last eternity. Today, we might see strikes as modern phenomena, but their roots stretch back to the first time a worker realized collective action could bend the ear of kings. The next time you admire the precision of an ancient wall, remember, those joints fit tight not just because of skill, but because someone, millennia ago, stood up and demanded fair treatment for the hands that built the world. The first builders relied on brute strength and simple physics, stacking stones until they stayed put. But as centuries passed, those rough piles transformed into feats of precision that still baffle engineers today. Consider the Incas' mortarless walls at Machu Picchu, where stones fit together so tightly you can't slip a razor blade between them. This wasn't magic, it was meticulous craftsmanship. Each block was pecked into shape with harder stones, then tested against its neighbors like a jigsaw puzzle carved from granite. The result: structures that shrug off earthquakes by dancing with the tremors rather than resisting them. An innovation modern architects are only now replicating with seismic dampers. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Roman builders were revolutionizing construction with a material we still rely on: concrete. But theirs wasn't the gray slurry we know today. By mixing volcanic ash from Pozzuoli with lime and seawater, they created a recipe that actually grew stronger underwater. Dive into the harbor of Caesarea, and you'll find 2,000-year-old concrete piers that have resisted erosion longer than most modern docks. Pantheon's dome, poured in a single pour and still the world's largest unreinforced concrete span, stands as a silent rebuke to anyone who calls ancient methods primitive. The real genius lies in how these technologies spread. Along the Silk Road, paper-thin Chinese brick vaulting techniques traveled west to influence Persian architects, who combined them with local glazes to create the shimmering domes of Isfahan. In Cambodia, Angkor's builders devised a grid of reservoirs and canals that doubled as both spiritual symbols and a way to float sandstone blocks from distant quarries. Every innovation was a response to necessity: the Incas' fear of quakes, Rome's need for harbors, Angkor's monsoon floods, proving that constraints breed creativity. Yet some secrets were lost to time. The Egyptians' method for casting limestone blocks on-site, hinted at by mineral analysis but still not fully replicated. The Mayas' lime plaster, mixed with tree sap to flex under jungle humidity. Even Roman concrete's full recipe was forgotten for centuries until modern labs decoded its self-healing properties: cracks filled by minerals that grow when water seeps in. These weren't just techniques, they were dialogues between builders and their environments, written in stone and mortar, the most humbling realization. Many ancient methods outperform our own. While modern steel-reinforced concrete crumbles in decades, Roman piers endure millennia. Where our seismic retrofits require costly alloys, Inca walls rely on geometry alone. As we rediscover these forgotten wisdoms, like using bamboo fibers to reinforce eco-concrete or mimicking termite mounds for passive cooling, we're not just studying history. We're relearning how to build a world that lasts. The desert sun could bake mud bricks into ceramic within hours, but the builders of Petra didn't just endure the heat, they weaponized it. Hidden within the rose-red cliffs of Jordan, the Nabateans carved entire cities into rock faces, not for grandeur alone, but for survival, their secret. Precision orientation. By aligning doorways and channels to catch high-altitude winds, they turned blistering gusts into natural air conditioning. Step inside one of Petra's tombs at noon, and you'll feel it. A 15-degree drop as air spirals through narrow shafts, cooled by the stone's thermal mass. Even their staircases doubled as climate control, their zigzag patterns slowing airflow to trap cooler air in chambers below. This wasn't just architecture, it was alchemy, transforming the desert's cruelty into comfort. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Anka's engineers faced the opposite challenge: too much water. Monsoons dumped 40 feet of rain annually, threatening to wash away temples and flood rice fields. Their solution, a hydraulic empire. Canals stretched over 60 miles, some wide as modern highways, channeling floodwaters into massive reservoirs called barrages. These weren't just storage pits, they were calibrated like instruments. During droughts, gates released water to nourish crops. In wet seasons, overflow cascaded through secondary channels, preventing erosion. The real stroke of genius: elevation gradients. By building temples on precise mounds, they ensured runoff flowed away from foundations, while porous laterite bricks absorbed excess moisture like sponges. In the Andes, builders fought frost with geometry. Inca terraces at Moray aren't just scenic, they're a masterclass in microclimate engineering. Circular layers create temperature differentials of nearly 30 degrees from top to bottom, allowing crops to thrive at altitudes where frost should kill them. Walls angled to maximize sun exposure by day radiate stored heat overnight, shielding tender plants. Even mortar played a role, mixed with crushed shells to flex during earthquakes and insulate against cold. What unites these innovations isn't just cleverness, but observation. The Nabateans studied how scorpions burrowed to escape heat. Anka's planners mimicked the Mekong's natural meanders. Inca masons replicated the way mountain springs self-drained. Their blueprints weren't drawn on parchment, but written in the rhythms of their environments. Today, as we grapple with rising seas and scorching cities, these ancient strategies don't just belong in history books, they hold urgent lessons for a planet learning to build with nature rather than against it. Buried just a stone's throw from the monuments they raised, the tombs of ancient builders tell a story history often overlooks: one of reverence, not anonymity. At Deir el-Medina, the village housing Egypt's royal tomb artisans, archaeologists uncovered graves where chisels, mallets, and measuring cords rested beside their owners, carefully arranged as if ready for the next day's work. One particularly poignant burial held a painter's palette, its pigment still vivid after millennia, nestled against the skeleton's fingers. These weren't haphazard offerings, they were passports to the afterlife, ensuring the deceased could practice their craft eternally. Inscriptions left no doubt about their status: overseer of works, master sculptor of the pharaoh, titles proclaiming pride that transcended death. Half a world away, Maya builders etched their identities into the very stones they shape. At Kapon, a stairway commemorating the city's history bears over 2,000 glyphs, not just royal propaganda, but the names of masons and plasterers who labored on it. One reads Be'alamnain, he who pounds the stone, followed by his father's name, linking generations of craftsmanship. In Palenque, a hidden chamber beneath the Temple of the Inscriptions revealed skeletons adorned with jade beads shaped like tools, their mouths stuffed with mortar, a symbolic meal for the journey to the underworld, where they'd continue building for the gods. The Incas took this reverence further, weaving builders into the cosmic order. At Machu Picchu, workers who died during construction were interred in niches overlooking the site, their bodies positioned to watch over the city forever. Forensic analysis shows some were buried with calloused hands clasped around miniature silver tools, replicas so detailed they included tiny hammer marks. Even their clothing carried meaning, woven patterns depicting the very walls they'd raised, turning their shrouds into blueprints for eternity. But perhaps the most touching memorials are the accidental ones. In Pompeii, a baker's tomb bears frescoes of his daily grind, not scenes of grandeur, but kneading dough, pulling loaves from ovens. Nearby, a mosaicist's grave is paved with his own handiwork, a geometric border slightly uneven where his apprentice finished the work. These weren't commissioned by kings, they were choices made by families and colleagues, testifying to a truth we often forget. The people who built the ancient world didn't just serve power. They left legacies in the quiet corners of history, where tools outlasted empires and names carved in stone whispered, "We were here." The blueprint for human ingenuity never carried borders. When a Greek architect sketched designs for a temple in Ephesus, his ideas might ripple across continents, reshaping a Hindu shrine in India or a royal tomb in Egypt. Trade routes didn't just move silk and spices, they carried entire schools of thought in the calloused hands of builders who swapped techniques like merchants haggling over gems. Take the stonemasons of Persepolis, whose fluted columns so closely mirrored Greek styles that historians once debated who influenced whom. The truth. Both craftsmen from Athens to Persia traded secrets in bustling ports, their shared language the universal grammar of plumb lines and load-bearing arches. Evidence of this cross-pollination hides in plain sight. At Ai Khanoum, a city founded by Alexander the Great in Afghanistan, excavations revealed a theater with Greek-style seating, but the stage faced east, aligning with local solar rituals. The mortar binding its stones contained rice husks, an Asian technique unknown in the Mediterranean. This wasn't cultural conquest, it was collaboration, where builders blended traditions to suit new landscapes. Similarly, Egyptian obelisks that once graced the Nile found their way to Rome, not as spoils of war, but as challenges. Local artisans, determined to replicate them, invented cranes capable of lifting 400-ton monoliths, a technology that later revolutionized European cathedral construction. The Silk Road served as the ultimate workshop. Chinese builders traveling westward brought paper-making, allowing architects to draft precise plans instead of relying on memory. In return, they carried back knowledge of Roman concrete, adapting it into the Great Wall's mortar. Even disasters spurred innovation. After an earthquake leveled Kashgar's minarets in the 7th century, Aigha builders incorporated flexible wooden frames learned from Tibetan monks, a technique that later surfaced in Ottoman mosques. What's most striking is how fluid these exchanges were. No bureaucracy controlled them, no patents hoarded ideas. A Phoenician glassblower might teach a Nubian mason to fuse decorative tiles in exchange for lessons on vaulting. The spiral staircases of Morocco's mosques share DNA with Mesopotamian ziggurat ramps, while Mayan corbel arches echo techniques from Cambodia's Angkor Wat. These connections weren't coincidences, they were the result of builders recognizing genius regardless of its accent. Perhaps the purest example lies in the humble brick. From the mud ovens of Mohenjo-Daro to the kilns of Byzantium, dimensions standardized not by decree, but by the reach of a mason's hand. Whether stamped with a pharaoh's cartouche or a Roman workshop mark, these blocks became the ultimate diplomats, fitting seamlessly into walls from the Indus Valley to the Rhine. When we trace their paths, we're not just following trade routes, we're mapping the quiet conversations that built the ancient world. one shared innovation at a time. The unfinished obelisk at Aswan lies like a fossilized dream, half carved from the living rock before a crack forced its abandonment. This 60-foot monolith, still clinging to the granite bedrock, tells a story more vivid than any completed monument ever could. The chisel marks frozen in time reveal the precise moment work stopped, tools dropped mid-swing, ropes left coiled where workers last placed them. Here, the grand ambitions of Pharaoh Hatshepsut collided with reality, leaving behind an open wound in the stone that whispers of engineering overreach and human limits. Not all interruptions came from technical failures. At Borsippa in Mesopotamia, the ziggurat meant to rival Babylon's Etemenanki rises only 7 tiers instead of the planned 9. Cuneiform tablets found nearby tell why. The king who began me did not complete me. War came, and his enemies burned the reed stores. The missing tiers aren't just absent, they're a ledger of conflict, with layers of ash between bricks marking successive invasions. Builders adapted as empires rose and fell. Some walls show 3 distinct brick styles as conquering armies repurposed the site between battles. Sometimes the story hides in what wasn't removed. In the quarries of Baalbek, the Romans left behind a 2,000-ton stone block, partially undercut but never transported. Its size alone suggests imperial confidence until you notice the hastily dug trenches around it, evidence of workers fleeing some unseen crisis. Modern core samples solved the mystery. A forgotten earthquake destabilized the ground, making further extraction suicidal. The real revelation: the Romans knew when to walk away, their pragmatism outweighing even imperial pride. More poignant are the sites abandoned by changing beliefs. Turkey's Mount Nemrut stands crowned by a 1st century BC temple where King Antiochus blended Greek and Persian gods into a new pantheon. The colossal statues remain, but their heads toppled long ago, not by invaders but by neglect. When Antiochus died, his syncretic religion died with him. The half-finished altar and unused foundation stones speak of a cult that outlived its congregation. Perhaps no site captures the fragility of power like Egypt's Pyramid of Djedefre. Its base stretches across the desert, but the structure barely rises before tapering off into rubble. Papyrus fragments found nearby record a simple explanation: the sand dwellers came. Bedouin raids disrupted supply lines, starving the project of both labor and materials. The pyramid stump stands as a monument to something far more universal than pharaonic ego: the precariousness of security, the ease with which order crumbles. These ruins teach us that history isn't just written in victories, but in interruptions. Every cracked obelisk and deserted quarry is a pause button pressed by time itself, freezing civilizations mid-sentence. When we trace the tool marks left by builders who never saw completion, we're not just studying failure, we're witnessing humanity's relentless, imperfect reach for permanence. For centuries, the only footprints explorers cared to follow led straight to treasure chambers and royal tombs. Worker villages were little more than afterthoughts, trampled underfoot in the rush for gold and glory. It wasn't until the late 19th century that a curious shift began. A British archaeologist named Flinders Petrie, crouched in the dust near the Great Pyramid, noticed something his predecessors had overlooked: tiny flakes of copper strewn like confetti across an otherwise barren stretch of desert. These weren't the droppings of some ancient beast. They were the shavings from thousands of sharpened chisels, the literal debris of forgotten labor. Petrie's discovery of the Giza workers' settlement in 1880 marked the first crack in a long-held myth, though it would take another 100 years for the full picture to emerge. Modern archaeology's tools have rewritten the story entirely. Where early excavators relied on shovels and gut instinct, teams now wield LiDAR scanners that peel back layers of earth like pages in a book. In the 1990s, a survey of the Theban Hills revealed the sprawling village of Deir el-Medina in shocking detail. Not just foundations, but bakeries with charred loaves still in ovens, children's toys tucked beneath floor stones, even love letters etched on pottery shards. Suddenly, these builders had voices. DNA analysis added another layer. Skeletal remains showed workers hailed from across the Mediterranean and sub-Saharan Africa, their diversity painting a far more cosmopolitan workforce than anyone imagined. One burial even held a woman with Nubian ancestry, her bones marked by the telltale muscle development of a lifelong stone carver, shattering assumptions about gendered labor. The real game changer came from something seemingly mundane, garbage. At Amarna, the abandoned city of the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, archaeologists sifted through ancient trash heaps and found payroll receipts. These ostraka scraps of limestone or pottery reused as notepads listed everything from daily rations to complaints about foremen. One scribbled note from a painter named Painab reads like a tweet from the past: "The sandstorm ruined my pigments again." Why does the gods' work have to wait on the wind? These fragments humanize the builders in ways grand inscriptions never could. Technology continues to peel back layers. Recent chemical analysis of mortar at Teotihuacan traced its ingredients to specific quarries, revealing supply chains that stretched hundreds of miles. In Rome, ground-penetrating radar uncovered builders' guild houses beneath the Forum, complete with faded frescoes showing construction scenes, including a cheeky caricature of an emperor micromanaging column placement. Perhaps most moving of all, a Swiss team using hyperspectral imaging on a Petra tomb found handprints in the plaster, their ridges so distinct they matched those of modern descendants still living in the area. What began as scattered copper flakes has blossomed into a revolution. Every laser scan, every strontium isotope test, every deciphered laundry list chips away at the old narrative of faceless drudges. These weren't just hands that built history, they were minds that solved problems, hearts that loved and lamented, lives that mattered. As one Egyptologist put it while brushing dust from a child's sandal in a worker's home, "We used to dig for kings. Now we're listening for whispers, and the walls at long last are starting to talk." Hollywood loves a good mystery, especially when it involves laser-wielding aliens or cursed pharaohs. But the truth behind ancient construction is stranger than any script. That iconic image of whip-cracked slaves hauling pyramid blocks, debunked by payroll records listing beer rations and sick days, the idea that lost technologies or divine intervention lifted 100-ton stones. Undercut by perfectly preserved ramps at sites like Karnak, where mudbrick inclines still bear the grooves of sledges dragged by skilled crews. Even the notion that these projects took lifetimes stems from a miscalculation. When you account for the thousands of well-fed, organized workers archaeology has uncovered, the math shifts dramatically. The Great Pyramid's 2.3 million blocks could have been laid in just 20 years with crews placing one block every 2 minutes during working seasons. That's not magic, it's logistics. Some myths persist because they're cinematic. Films show lone genius architects sketching perfect plans, but ancient blueprints were often improvisational. At Göbekli Tepe, builders adjusted pillar placements as they carved, responding to the stone's natural fractures, the Parthenon's famed perfect curves. They're actually optical illusions, subtle bulges engineered to counteract how straight lines appear saggy from a distance. These weren't flawless masterpieces, but human solutions to real-time problems, with chisel marks left by apprentices still visible if you know where to look. Then there's the wildest fiction of all, that ancient cultures couldn't communicate across continents. Yet when Roman concrete appears in Chinese tombs, or Mayan corbel arches mirror India's Buddhist caves, the explanation isn't extraterrestrial, it's trade routes. Builders swapped techniques as freely as spices. A Phoenician ship's carpenter might teach an Egyptian mason how to peg joints tighter, while Inca stonemasons likely learned suspension bridge tricks from Amazonian weavers. The real secret knowledge was simply the collective problem-solving of countless unnamed minds. Perhaps the most damaging myth is that these were joyless projects. Tomb paintings at Deir el-Medina show workers laughing as they mix plaster, while Mesoamerican murals depict construction festivals with dancers in jaguar masks. Even Stonehenge's bluestones, dragged 200 miles from Wales, might have been part ritual pilgrimage. The stones themselves hold clues. At Baalbek, a half-carved column bears game boards etched by workers on brakes, their dice rolls fossilized in stone. So why does fiction overshadow fact? Mystery sells. But the reality, ordinary people achieving the extraordinary through grit, ingenuity, and teamwork, isn't just truer. It's infinitely more inspiring. Next time you see a pyramid on screen, remember, the real builders left something better than Hollywood special effects. They left proof of what humans can do when we work together. The hands that shaped ancient monuments didn't just leave behind stones, they left a blueprint for how to move through the world. What makes these builders matter today isn't just their engineering prowess, but the way they solved problems together, adapted to setbacks, and found dignity in labor. Think about the teamwork required to haul a 2-ton block up a pyramid ramp. This wasn't blind obedience to some pharaoh's ego. It was a collective decision to trust the person holding the rope next to you, to synchronize pulls so no one got crushed. Modern workplaces preach collaboration, but these builders lived it. Their survival literally depended on it. When a Mayan crew raised a temple without cranes, they weren't just stacking rocks. They were demonstrating how diverse skills quarrymen, mortar mixers, scaffold builders could interlock like the stones they placed. Innovation wasn't some top-down decree in these societies. It bubbled up from necessity. The Roman concrete that still withstands seawater didn't come from an emperor's brainstorm, but from laborers noticing volcanic ash made their mix harder. The Incas' earthquake-proof masonry, likely born from watching how terraced crops swayed but didn't collapse during tremors. These weren't eureka, a moment scribbled in journals, but slow, iterative improvements passed around campfires. Today, we call this bottom-up innovation and act like it's a Silicon Valley invention, but ancient builders were mastering it millennia ago. A stonemason in Karnak tweaking his chisel angle to save time didn't need a productivity seminar. He just needed someone to listen. Resilience looks different when your safety net is the person hauling stones beside you. When rations ran low at Deir el-Medina, workers didn't riot, they organized, negotiating as a unified front. Modern labor movements echo this. Collective bargaining didn't start in 19th century factories, but in the dust of Egyptian worksites. Even their strikes were measured, halting progress just enough to be heard, not so much that projects collapsed. Compare that to today's burnout culture where exhaustion is worn like a badge. These builders knew something we've forgotten. Sustainable work requires rhythms, festivals to break monotony, infirmaries to heal bodies, shared meals to sustain morale. A fresco in Pompeii shows builders taking a midday nap under a half-finished wall, their tools neatly stacked. They understood that rest wasn't laziness, it was fuel for the next lift. Perhaps their most enduring lesson is about legacy. We remember pharaohs and emperors, but it's the unnamed hands that made their visions stand. When a Nabatean carpenter fit a door in Petra so precisely it still swings today, he wasn't just following orders, he was saying, "I was here." The same impulse drives a software engineer perfecting code or a nurse refining bedside care. Dignity in work isn't about whose name gets carved in stone. It's about knowing your contribution holds up something greater. Next time you walk past a construction site, listen. Beneath the jackhammers, you might hear the faintest echo of a 4,000-year-old truth. Greatness isn't built by legends. It's built by people like us showing up, solving problems, and passing the rope to the next pair of waiting hands. The wonders of ancient construction don't have to stay locked in textbooks or distant travel dreams. Thanks to modern technology, you can walk the same streets as these builders from your living room. Start with the Digital Giza Project, a breathtaking online portal that lets you explore the pyramids and their surrounding worker villages in photorealistic 3D. Zoom in close enough to see the chisel marks on limestone blocks, or pull back to view the entire plateau as it looked 4,000 years ago, complete with bustling bakeries and dormitories. The platform even layers in archaeological notes, so hovering over a tool left in a corner might reveal its purpose or the name of the artisan who used it. It's not just a tour, it's a time machine. For a deeper dive into daily life, the Museo Egizio in Turin offers virtual reality reconstructions of Deir el-Medina. Strap on a headset or navigate their web-based tour, and suddenly you're standing in a painter's cramped workshop, watching as he grinds malachite into vibrant green pigment. The attention to detail is staggering. You can hear the rhythmic tap of chisels from neighboring houses, see the flicker of oil lamps casting shadows on half-finished tomb reliefs. Interactive hotspots let you pick up replica tools, testing whether you could have hauled a stone sled or mixed mortar like an ancient pro. Prefer something hands-on. Google Arts and Culture's Ancient Worlds collection stitches together high-res scans of construction sites from Petra to the Great Wall. Their Street View-style navigation lets you clamber up Inca terraces or peer down Roman aqueducts, while annotated overlays decode engineering secrets. One standout feature, a side-by-side slider comparing present-day ruins to digital reconstructions, revealing how Angkor Wat's moats once glittered or how the Parthenon's colors blazed before weathering. Don't overlook university projects either. UCLA's digital Karnak tracks the temple's evolution over 2,000 years, letting you toggle between Pharaoh's additions like layers in a cake. Meanwhile, the Open Heritage Alliance uses laser scans to preserve at-risk sites. Their model of Palmyra's arches, captured before conflict damage, now serves as both an educational tool and a digital memorial. The best part, many of these resources are free. Archaeologists and technologists are racing to digitize fragile sites before time or turmoil claims them, turning your screen into a window on worlds we almost lost. So grab your device and step through. The stones are waiting, and so are the stories of the hands that shaped them. As the echoes of chisels fade and the dust of centuries settles, one truth stands unshaken. The most enduring monuments weren't built by gods or kings alone, but by the calloused hands of ordinary people who dared to shape the impossible. The next time you stand before the pyramids or trace the curves of an ancient aqueduct, listen closely. Those stones don't whisper the names of pharaohs. They hum with the memories of masons who laughed as they mixed mortar, of mothers who balanced babies on their hips while grinding pigments, of apprentices who bled learning their craft. These builders weren't just laborers, they were mathematicians calculating slopes in the sand, artists painting frescoes by lamplight, innovators turning volcanic ash into indestructible concrete. Their legacy isn't just in what they built, but in how they built it together. Think of the Inca stonemason who fit blocks so tightly his joints outlasted earthquakes, or the Roman engineer who scribbled adjustments on a wax tablet when the arch wouldn't hold. Picture the Egyptian scribe tallying beer rations with the same care as temple dimensions, ensuring his crew stayed strong. These weren't footnotes in history, they were its backbone. When we reduce their stories to myths of slave whips or alien interventions, we don't just dishonor them, we rob ourselves of their real lessons. That collaboration outlasts tyranny, that skill transcends social rank, that even the grandest visions rely on someone showing up to do the work, day after sun-scorched day. So let's rewrite the narrative. Share in the comments which builder's story resonated most. Was it the strike organizers of Deir el-Medina, or the Maya women whose fingerprints linger in temple plaster? Hit subscribe to keep uncovering histories where the heroes don't wear crowns but tool belts. Because the past isn't just a gallery of masterpieces, it's a living conversation. And every voice from the quarry to the king's court deserves to be heard. Press that notification bell and let's keep listening. The stones have so much left to